This interesting thing is we've got time pretty at this stage, not at the end.
Well, that's normal.
What this stage?
Yeah, every audit you have.
Yeah. Well, I would
This-
put that. She does think that.
Focus on how much they're going to charge you.
All right, so we are now back live streaming and into public, now back in public. So just looking back at the agenda. So public agenda, we've been through points 1, 2, 3, 4, confirmation of agenda. I'll go to 5, declarations of interest. I think we're all aware of the need to stand aside. Any potential conflict may arise. Confirmation of minutes. So that's on public. Having a look at that. Does anyone have any comments around that? Yes,
Yeah, I've just got a comment. I just wonder whether the minutes should record all people that are attending the meeting other than just members. I think that would be normal.
Yep.
Particularly other councillors.
It's got Alexa in there.
Sorry.
It's got Alexa in
The Lex is part of the
there.
Your apologies.
it's under members.
Your apologies, they were listed who were in attendance.
apologies. It was noted that in addition to the meeting members, okay, yes, we're present. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we can have a think about that one afterwards. Yep.
So it's on there, but you're right. we've got somewhere to-
Yeah. Yes. Up top.
It should just have in attendance.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. At other meetings, you do see that. Don't you? I do see that. Any other comments?
Gary.
Yep, Gary, great.
No, look, my hand was up just prior to this. Just to note, Mr. Chairman, that I've got a council organised legal meeting at 2 o'clock, so I'll be having to duck out of the meeting just for about half an hour. So my apology for that.
Okay, within half an hour. Took me an hour, Gary.
An hour, maybe.
All right, mover and seconder, please.
Those
Okay,
hands.
Anton, thank you. In favour?
Right.
Now moving on to actions, I do have. Just gonna bring it up. So I'm on page 9 of the pack. Yeah, so stuff to arrange health and safety workshop. That was done, so we can now put that as complete. Thank you very much for that. And then climate change deep dive, which we are getting today as well. So that is great to see. That's round 2. Matters for consideration. Nothing else has been brought to my attention. Right. And then we will dive straight into the next item, which is legislative compliance. So we have Janet. Talk to us. Janet's legislative compliance, definitely on the terms of reference for the Audit and Risk Committee, and yeah, part of our annual plan to have this covered off.
Absolutely.
And to hear from you. So thank you very much for your report. I'll let you just do a brief introduction.
Thank you. My name is Janet Ashcroft and I'm legal counsel at the Regional Council. I think I've met all of you with the exception of you today now, Andrew. The legislative compliance report deals with our first report on Comply With, which is a new online platform tool that we use to assess and manage legislative risk at the council. You'll hopefully see from the report which you've read that we've now undertaken 2 surveys, and the result of the most recent survey is very high compliance, 98.5%, with the just a few outstanding or partial compliances which are actually actively being managed. The only other thing I comment on would be that we're planning on, the proposal is that we would do 2 surveys a year. So it's my hope that we would be able to bring the results of those surveys back to council twice a year as instead of just once a year to the Audit and Risk subcommittee, just to keep them more briefed. And in line with that, would be going monthly to ELT. That's the only other things.
All right, Tim?
So Janice, how can we get assurance that the system that you have, this comply with, is actually accurate and doing the right things and giving us the right information?
So if you've had a look at the report, you should have confidence in that it maps the obligations of every staff member at council across every bit of legislation that applies to us.
So how does it actually work? How does it do all this?
So that the managers or the operators of Comply With work with a number of councils, and they set the platform against all of our legislative obligations.
And would I be correct? And so it's a piece of software which has got the legislation's been uploaded to it. Would that be right? And then it's sort of allocated to staff who then have to sort of read it and then say whether they think they're complying with that or not.
So we train all of our staff on Comply With, and anyone with an obligation will have all of the obligations that flow from the legislation that empowers them mapped to their role, and then they're alerted to any changes in the legislation. It just operates as a tool to ensure that you're fully compliant.
So there's quite a lot of reliance placed on the setup initially of that system. Is that reviewed?
Yes, it is, and so a big process leading into this was putting it in place and allocating it and making sure we had all the correct allocations. And it is an ongoing process. As people change roles, people move sideways, people move up, people go on secondment. So it's always being renewed. And the Comply With itself updates every week. So every week, all the new law changes apply to all the roles. And with the alert system, we're notified. I get all of the alerts. So then I send it out to anyone that it impacts. Yeah, it's a very effective tool. I know the DCC uses it, for example, Aurora, Waikato Regional Council. There's a number of local governments utilising it. It's very effective.
Okay.
I was just going to say, Tim, so I think paragraph 20 is also to your question around we've got Comply With, but that is almost a self-assessment tool, but Janet's proposing sort of focused, targeted mini audits on particular topics out of Comply With as another layer of assurance. And then obviously we talk about internal audit as a bigger program later in the agenda today as well. So I suppose this is one tool amongst a series that will give us that assurance in terms of that audit process.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe going down a rabbit hole, which I don't need to go down to, but it's your paragraph. I had the pleasure of listening to Stephanie from ECAN on Tuesday at a conference, and her words were that we're a creature of statute and of the treaty. And this, look, I think this is absolutely fantastic, but I'm not quite sure that it talks to the treaty and it talks to the Comply With, but and is that a potential part that isn't in there? And equally the Ngātahu Settlements Act, which came up very largely in the discussion that I listened to. So that's a question for you.
And those are questions I'll helpfully get back to you on, but I could list all of the legislation, but our treaty obligations are fully mapped against the right people in our register.
Okay, so that is included, but it's not so clear. It's just that your paragraph 5 talked about we're a creature of statute, which treaty is something different slightly.
Yeah.
And she was really clear that it's the statutes and treaty. So
I take that point.
No, but and as long as that's done, that's
We've
good.
also got the cultural audit package.
Yeah.
So we talk about this whole audit package, and that will look at some of, I guess, maybe the non-legislative, more relationship-based obligations under TTIP as well. So I think that again, it just comes back to there's no one process that will give us complete coverage. But if we put all these pieces together, we should be able to give ourselves that assurance.
And no, and that's absolutely great in context. I think it's an absolutely wonderful report. Thank you.
I just had a couple of points of clarification. So whether you comply with, I'll just scroll past my page, but I didn't make something like that. So if I got it right, that your survey is for 45 people within the organisation, and this is for the February to August one last year, and then the next one had 43 people surveyed. And so, and then there's like, the first one is like, each person had like 30 odd site questions to answer.
I myself had 64.
30 responses completed or whatever. Yeah. Okay, well, so it'll vary. And I just note that the non-compliance gone from 23 down to 16, but is 45 a big enough? How do you pick the 45 and is that a big enough? Didn't seem like a very big sample to me.
Yeah, so comply with maps obligations to roles. And so the reason why we have, I guess, the number surveyed going from 45 to 44 could be to do with, for example, a change in chief executive. Richard still holds the communications GM portfolio. There's all those sorts of things. We've got acting people, we've got people that are doing multiple roles, Amanda. So anyone that holds a delegation or by statute, it refers to this particular role being authorised or empowered or obliged to do something. It's the person that we employ that holds that role that matches to that piece of statute that gets the obligations.
Let's give you one.
So the 45 is basically all
Of our legislative requirements. match to people.
So the 45 will probably be more that management layer. So there's so much legislation we need to comply with, organisation needs to comply with. What takes, say, any health and safety legislation would have been allocated to more than likely sort of the health and safety team or the manager to say, are we complying with these key elements of it?
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, and so you would have other pieces of legislation be more allocated to those specific teams.
There's team leaders, managers, senior advisors, principal advisors. There's different people in different roles.
It's actually because prior to this, organisations have struggled about how to tackle legislative compliance and say, how do you actually get across it? So these sorts of tools are a useful way of it. It is just a tool. It all depends on how you use it. But it's a pretty good place to be.
Well, that's probably answered the question, to be fair. It's not like a
Absolutely.
sample of everybody's just
That's
the
exactly
top ones here.
Yeah, and doing that that audit check is going to be absolutely key to have in place as well. So
Yeah, it's a really great idea because it will allow us to ask for evidence to demonstrate that they are compliant.
Yeah.
So it's going to be wonderful.
good. All right. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jeanette. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
So everyone together, please. Yeah, Kate and Gretchen, thank you. In favour?
All right.
Fine.
Right. Janet.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll
Page
head away,
20.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Gary. Moving to page 25 of the pack. Our safety and wellbeing team, again, second time today. Thank you very much for a great workshop this morning. Much appreciated. So yeah, we've got your pack in front of us, which is a standing item on our agenda. But I will get you just to make a brief sort of comment on it first before we go to questions.
Fantastic. Well, I'll kick off now. I know I introduced the team this morning, but just for the purposes of being in the formal meeting session, I'll do introductions again. So first up, I'd like to introduce Mark Olson, who is our new People and Safety Manager. Mark started on Monday, and we're really lucky to have him joining the team. And then we've got Kelly Stewart, our People Services Lead, and Gina Watts, our team leader, acting team leader of Health, Safety and Wellbeing. So I think probably our approach here is we'll take the report as read, as we are usually inclined to do, and we're very happy to take questions on areas of interest from around the table.
Great.
Yes, and the thing that stood out in this report was the number of violence incidents that took place. And I'm not sure if this is year to date or for the month. It shows that there's 9 violence and contact sort of situations. That's obviously a concern. And what have we done about it, and what were the incidents that happened exactly that we should be aware of?
Sure. So this is Q3 reporting for health, safety and wellbeing, so
quarter.
January to March, and I'll hand over to Gina to talk a bit more in detail on that. Awesome.
So those 9 incidents actually run from January to date. So building that a little bit more of that current kind of picture for where we're at the moment. Part of the reason why we've got a little bit of an increase in reporting is recently we had a new health and safety representative jump into the customer experience team, who's really enabled and kind of encouraged them to continue to report, and some instances that maybe weren't being correctly identified into the system actually getting reflected as what's happening versus those lower numbers that we've seen for the past couple of months. See 5 of those incidents directly to the customer experience team, one with a contractor, which was bus related, and then a couple to do with compliance operations, so things like pollution response and so forth.
And I think what we're seeing here mirrors what other local government councils are finding, and there's been quite a bit of reporting in the media, and there's some of the councils been running campaigns on this. So it is, I don't think we're unique in the sector for this kind of reporting, for these kind of numbers. Sorry.
So what are we doing in terms of responding to that, to try and bring it down, bring those figures down?
Yeah. So we have a number of different things in place. One of the things that we're doing at the moment is starting off a review of our duress procedures. So that's kind of one of the tools that we have in how we respond to incidents of violence and aggression. It can be challenging to actually reduce the occurrences of them. Of course, there can be frustrations that members of the public or customers might have. But then there's also just those personal levels that people can bring with them through any door that they kind of enter through that we can't can always control. So certainly on the other side, we offer a lot of different de-escalation training. So that's both as a general kind of stance. So actually learning how to identify and classify what is counted as violence and aggression, right down to those de-escalation techniques. So trying to reduce down that person's state of mind at that point and de-escalate. And then the encouragement of actually getting reports in. So yeah, and then obviously the procedure side that we have. So a little bit touched on this morning with the duress alarms around the building. So building that other around team support for those people as well.
Yeah, I guess there was a figure that came through this morning. I think it was death through assault, and I think in public sector or something like that, or
government
what was
sector.
that figure?
Yeah.
The government sector.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was quite an alarming figure too, I think. And was that nationwide, was it, or?
That was just for the government sector.
It was just the government sector.
New Zealand wide. Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
not local government specifically, but yeah, an example of what potentially.
It was also referred to in our briefings that we did last week. So our customer experience manager is very, from our frontline team, very focused on that sort of wellbeing wraparound with the team as well. When there are incidents, they do debriefs and they do lessons learned and they support each other really, really strongly. I think there's a broader point, and Rich, you might want to talk to this as well, but I guess as an organisation, we're also doing a lot of work in the space of the teams really support the customer team by having really clear information. So when people are ringing up, they get answers to their questions at, trying to, for first point of resolution, being transparent about what we're doing, trying to provide that support so that we're hopefully not triggers for people. But the reality is, I guess, there's really challenging cost of living situations where, we take rates. So that can be a pressure point.
I'm just sort of wondering about how we are proactive around this area. Like, I mean, MSD have security guards, don't they? And so, do we know the areas where this, we'll know the areas where this is happening most. Is that something that we should be considering?
We have looked, I guess we're applying risk-based assessment all the time. And so at the moment, we don't feel like we need security guards, but obviously the team are, continuing to assess, and if it got to the point where that's what they felt like they needed, we would certainly support that. In terms of our frontline staff out in the field, there's information sharing. So when incidents take place, that information is made available to other staff. So we don't willingly send other staff into a similar environment. We've had good cooperation from the police in some of those more extreme events where the behaviour's been at a really unacceptable level. The local police have been willing to make follow-up phone calls and receive our and engage with us on that. So it's taken really seriously. I think it all ends.
I think Amanda's covered that really well. I think the key thing is that we are always scanning, I guess, what the triggers or the risks might be, and then responding to those, not sort of having a look once and saying we're happy with our setup and leaving it. And I know the field staff that I'm more familiar with from previous, they are constantly having a look at that and sharing information and going to per site, that sort of thing, particularly in that regulatory space, which can be a trigger. So I think it is a sector-wide issue, and it's probably become more of an issue with the other stresses that are within society that Amanda touched on. So we just need to make sure that we are also constantly assessing it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I know it's you brought it up in terms of one of the top risks in your sort of risk table, but later on, so that's great to see. And I know certainly last training it was one of the topics that we talked about at audit risk. So it is there, and has been and probably will be. So it is about how we manage it. And having those critical risks in there now is great in this pack, because I guess it gives us that oversight that we need. I'll certainly say that it would be great to keep those in there, so that sort of every quarter we do see if the risk profile has changed. So it's more just to see if the risk has risen or stayed the same or decreased, just to those critical risks, or if there's new ones that have arisen from a health and safety point of view. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, there's probably, and I don't want to demean the wording, but of those, I'm really interested in if there hasn't been actually any physical violence, are we comfortable that we have, and knowing what's happening in our market, as it were, that we have got sufficient, especially in the customer experience base here, that we've got sufficient barriers and mechanisms to prevent that next step from verbal to physical. Yeah.
So when that customer service desk was designed, we engaged a security professional to design it in a way that the height and the width of the counter actually makes it really difficult for someone to do that next step. And it's one of those steps that we're really actively planning in for the new build for Whare Urunaka as well.
Cool.
Little different in Queenstown. It's got a clear perspex up, but a different kind of team structure there as well.
And so in your field, you're working on this compliance area, the tricky type of areas with a double teaming for those sorts of things.
Yeah, they're always looking at that, and it's not. We've got staff from all sorts of teams going on sites for different reasons, so they're all undertaking those assessments. But it's particularly, I guess, particular a risk in that regulatory space and in the pollution response space, where they are often turning up unannounced. Compliance is a little bit different because it's an audit of a consent that they're expecting. But pollution response is often an unexpected visit, so that's one where it's a two staff function.
Yeah, and adding to that, so are we keeping a register of people that may have caused issues or cause issues, so other staff are aware that when so-and-so is approaching, that there could be, or if they're going to see someone, that they're aware that could be an issue there?
Yes, it is recorded. It's on a GIS map layer, essentially, which all of those teams interact with, especially when they're at the planning stage of their day. So if they see a flag site, then they can ensure that they plan appropriately with another person, or generally how they think about approaching it.
Yeah, so that's a standard practice, Gina, that we've got going.
Yep.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Great, Kate.
I think it's good to have Mark and Richard here at the first roles on audit and risk, because and with this report, I think the layout looks different. I think it is than we've had before, but the workforce snapshot information I found really interesting. And as far as the difference that I think Mark and Richard can make to that, the results there is a big challenge for you guys. The fact is that we're only looking at the last 12 months, we haven't got anything to compare it to. Have you got any idea how that compares to pre-COVID, especially the sick days and the annual leave? I presume that's a negative, the annual leave. That's a deficit in our budget.
It'll be a liability on a balance sheet.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
yes, yeah.
Balance available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's the first question. Second question is, only because I heard it on Radio New Zealand, which is my news, is the amount of people taking lunch breaks, which sounds nothing, but it is actually a huge measure of productivity if they don't take them, and a wellness of a company. And whether you have any data or way of knowing if people taking lunch breaks. So there's three questions here about how is this changing? It's a picture of what is now, but how it looks comparatively. And if we do the measure of wellness which is quite an instant result.
Do you want me to start? I think you can. So in terms of a bit of the longitudinal data, so during COVID, our turnover rate dropped significantly, dramatically. So this is now post-COVID, that has come up as there's been a lot more, obviously, mobility in the workforce, the borders have opened up, and people, there was some obviously inherent turnover in there anyway. So I wasn't in this role prior to COVID, so I actually can't tell you what it was before COVID. But yeah, we're certainly on the up at the moment. But that's also been combined with a huge increase in our FTE. And so understandably, when you're bringing a lot of people on, there is a bit of churn in there. So that was your first question. The second question was?
It was about annual leave and liability. Is that going up? As a liability, because
annual leave balances generally increased significantly during COVID for obvious reasons, because people couldn't go anywhere, and so we actively manage that through both the ELT and the management team in terms of leave balances, getting them down to what would be considered a healthy average for people to keep as a balance. And that also manages the liability on the books as well. So
what I was thinking is that while we've got 12 months, these as trends are actually more important than the actual specific data just for the last 12 months.
Yes, and so we undertook to provide people and snapshot data. This was late last year, and so this is only the second time we've provided it. Previously, there wasn't people data. For the last few years, there hasn't been people data coming here, so we can start to build some trends.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, so trend being the key word that you were mentioning. So that's something.
But I think they're wonderful things for KPIs we work to in due course as well.
And in terms of lunch breaks, so we have I think it's a guideline on rest and breaks, and we also have fatigue from a health and safety and wellbeing perspective. We have quite significant fatigue policy, like fatigue tools, so fatigue management policy and protocols and guidelines.
Kind of a bit of a toolbox with it as well. So how you might structure a day if you're out in the field.
God forbid the ones that have to suffer us for a whole day.
Sorry. But I was about to say, in parallel to that, with the rise of flexible working, I mean, we also have some staff who, take their lunch break at a particular time because that enables them to do something that matters to them more than having the lunch break from 12 to 12:30 like everyone else. So, it's there's certainly a lot of, obviously people should be taking breaks. So maybe it doesn't look like the standard 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock.
We encourage a 1 hour lunch break also. So that's sort of the default in our employment agreement. So staff can choose to take less, obviously not less than half an hour. That's the legislative requirement when they're working above a certain number of hours. But we do encourage a longer one initially, and then flexibility around that. As they sort of get into a rhythm in a position.
Thank you.
And also, I guess the interim chief executive brought back morning tea biscuits in the tea room. So there's, we've actually got a really vibrant morning tea space that a lot of staff come down and use, and across all the offices and the depots. So there is a culture of encouraging people to take time together.
In this current year,
I haven't stopped it.
as long as it's chocolate biscuits.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
So I guess, so just to end, Thank you for the format of the report. So good to see the activity in terms of training that's going on, of course, the incidents and reporting on those, but then just that critical risk lens, which would be great to sort of keep in there, just so that we're sort of keeping oversight of that. And then, of course, in that table was the subcontractors, which we talked about this morning, which we've got a note on to some more information on that in the next quarters pack. Yeah, in terms of subcontractors. So I think we are. Yep, happy to note. Yep, move it, Kate and Tim, the second. Everyone happy? All right. Great. Thank you very much, team, for your help today. It's been great.
Thank you. Thanks.
Right, so moving on to the next agenda item, I'm on page 39 of the pack, our climate change deep dive, one that I'm very pleased to see, because it is actually the first of our deep dives coming out of our risk work. And I guess this first came to fruition a few years ago, where we said, let's look and identify our key risks. And then once we have done that, let's do a deep dive into one of the key risks at each audit risk committee meeting. And this is the first cab off the rank. So it's great to be able to have the discussion today, and then we will be looking at other ones for other committee meetings too. So just do a brief introduction.
I think knows Fran, who's our principal advisor for climate change and subject matter expert. So as you've said, we've been working on the maturity of our risk management, so led by Nick probably last year, the year before. And this is part of, I guess, new tools to better understand and manage our risk. So we've got been working on both the content and the form and the substance. So this is our new deep dive template. We've obviously got the preventions, which are our actions to minimise the likelihood that the risk will occur, our existing controls, our assessment of controls, and then a risk improvement plan, which is new in the last few months. And sitting underneath that left-hand column, we've got a risk improvement plan with a little bit more detail, and we'll be bringing that back to Audit and Risk on a quarterly basis with any updates in terms of the delivery of the risk improvement plan. So that's really just the kind of the high level. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So certainly on our risk register, climate change and how that could impact the organisation, or will impact the organisation, is one of the key risks. And when you think about that, you can think about it from all the different levels. So anything that's running through your head is correct in terms of, so this here is at its highest level, and sort of saying to us, what are the different risks that are out there, and then how, as we as an organisation, are looking to address those. So I'm just going to start with Alexa, because she had her hand up first. Alexa.
Kia ora, thank you. It's great to see this this report come. Thank you very much, and it's looking pretty comprehensive to me. I'm just wondering if it seems to me that we're missing. I think we've got one in process, and I can't remember. I'm sure somebody will tell me whether this adequately addresses the long-term consequences and the impacts on economies and lifestyles. Of course, it can't really, but it feels like I wonder if there's an economic situation, an economic thing that we can pull together that shows the costs of not acting, almost like a cost-benefit ratio. Do we have something like that underway anywhere in our organisation? the silence makes me think we probably don't.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do actually. Yes, sorry. Yes.
Through the chair, so we don't currently, but it's definitely something that we'll can look to include, and no doubt will probably come out as part of the climate change strategy development process.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Right, thank you.
Excellent. Kate.
Look, and I'm raising this again. I just lost my place. I raised it the other day, and I don't expect an answer today, but Janet's in the room. So we've got in here that I think a fourth point, or the one over the page, is lead the response. And sorry, just lost the page. Lead regional partnerships to coordinate climate change mitigation and adaptation to prevent climate maladaptation and ensure a cohesive set of actions to mitigate emissions. I really like doing that as a local government person, but I am concerned that we're mixing the liabilities potentially of where the direct line of responsibility is with a TA at present with that stuff. I think we have a role to find and highlight the natural hazards, and by trying to lead and putting words like that into this, we risk confusing the legal situation and our responsibility if things go wrong. And so it's something that I've asked of us to just be careful as we develop our long-term plan and consider getting into the space more. I have no problems that we want to help the TAs, but there is a point that we may make it very difficult for anyone to hold a council to account, because they'll say, oh no, but we're relying on ORC, and it actually makes it harder for a constituent to understand where those liabilities land. And so I just want to make sure that we're not trying to be everything to everyone and actually getting in the way of those responsibility lines. Sorry.
Yeah. And there is a bill before Parliament at the moment, which is in its second reading, which expands and confirms the law around natural hazards and delineates between regional councils and territorial authorities. And we don't have liability to the public. We have protection for the information that we provide to the TAs and they distribute to the public. It just requires us to provide the information in plain English so people can understand the natural hazard risks associated with any properties. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, I remember the conversation that okay, and the point was well made and would be considered in anything we bring back in terms of what is our role and should we take that role?
Yeah.
What then does that mean for us in the liability sector? I think the one that's in the plan at the moment is more around the leadership in terms of collaboration and coordination. So we don't have a whole lot of independent work programs across the TLAs and the regional councils that are overlapping and we're missing opportunities to better coordinate. That's how I read that one, as opposed to what you're talking about is getting into some of the responses and what risk we take on by telling people or by doing the work.
Yeah. And well, I think, out in the field, we have to be really clear about that in our own minds as councillors and as staff. And I'm not feeling that I can tell it needs to be part. So that's where I'm just wanted to raise it again. This is the appropriate place.
It probably follows on from this discussion, but I don't seem to see in here, and I'm not sure if it should be here or not, our contribution to the South Dunedin Future Plan, which is a climate response. It's not here. Does it fit or doesn't it?
I think it did mention.
Yeah, I missed it.
I did mention the word. Yeah, I did see the words South Dunedin here.
It's under the discussion, environmental risk discussion, and I guess it's part of that partnership and collaboration with others.
Page 41.
Paragraph 6.
Sorry.
Yeah. Who is your target climate officers group, or are you just yourself at the moment? Is that expanding? And where have you got support?
All of the TLAs have representation in the region in the Otago Climate Officers Group.
So have they got paid staff doing that now, each TLA?
Yes, but not all of them are dedicated climate change people. Some of them have other roles within councils, particularly the smaller ones.
Yeah. So Waitaki has now got a full-time.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And just going back to Kate's point, is that I've had queries from the Waitaki district ratepayers saying, well, why is the TLA doing something when it's ORC's responsibility? So it'll be quite good to get that clarification where everything does sit. sort it out, but we'll wait for a bill and that come through. But
Yeah, I suppose that's probably what I was gonna say. It seems to be quite a complex space in terms of where responsibilities lie, but yeah, that new act is gonna that's what I understand from the South Dunedin Futures program and some of the stuff that Jean-Luc was saying about us actually taking a stronger leadership role in some of the adaptation, particularly more so than we have been previously. So I guess, yeah, that's right. None of us quite understand the space, but it is shifting. Some people probably do, like Evan and Jean-Luc, and I don't though.
Yeah, certainly one of the points I was quite keen to see in here that you've highlighted is just around there's so much information out there in terms of climate change, with its regulations coming through, but also information from me or information that we're producing ourselves and how that sort of filters into the organisation and then to the correct teams to make their own decision, whether it's the infrastructure teams who are doing maintenance or flood banks and the likes. So sounds like you've got some a working group internally. If you'd like to sort of touch on that, it'd be quite good just to hear what that sort of is covering.
Yes, so the Otago Climate Change Internal Working Group is a cross-council working group internally within the ORC with representation across all of the GM departments. And we meet on a monthly basis to bring up climate change issues across the organization. And we're currently scoping out a program of work, which would include, for example, developing climate change policy within the organization and contributing to the climate change strategy. Because there's a lot of things that we need to sort out internally. So we need to have a common position in terms of the shared emissions pathway feature that we might be adapting to. Like every single team and council needs to know what that is.
And so just one of sort of the prudent ones is if we are doing work on flood banks and the likes, and sort of the design of those or maintenance of those, and having that long view of what the impacts from climate are, that's all fed into the relevant teams at the moment.
The GM of operations might wish to comment on that.
Yes, it is. So a couple of pieces of work underway at the moment are scheme reviews of our two principal flood schemes, Lower Tyree and Lower Clutha. We were explicitly considering the effect of future climate change on scheme performance. And then there are other pieces of work. We've just established a groundwater monitoring network on the Clutha Delta to monitor the effects of sea level rise on groundwater. We fund the Green Island sea level recorder, those sorts of things. So there's quite a bit of work done in terms of review, analysis, and then information to inform those decisions. And then that translates into work programs.
All right, any other questions? Okay, move Kevin, second. On this side, Gretchen, in favour?
Aye.
Thank you very much. It's very good to get this, our first deep dive. So we appreciate it. Good time.
Thank you.
Right, so moving on to page 43 of the pack, annual report timetable. Nick and Sarah. Oh, good. Right, so
So this paper is similar to what we've brought you in previous years. It just outlines our timetable that we're planning for the annual report. Obviously, we've been in discussions with the auditors on this timetable to make sure that it meets in with their with what they can actually provide. The current, if I just go, I've detailed the dates in the executive summary for you. The current plan is that we would be bringing you in the Audit and Risk Subcommittee on the 21st of September, the draft of the annual report. That is likely to be what we've done in previous years, which we call like a page tuner, where we go through each of the pages and you can ask detailed questions on the annual report. We then would present the annual report to Council on the 25th of October, which for its adoption and signing. So the paper does outline some changes to the accounting standards. It's very much what Deloitte already touched on. There's really only one change that's going to actually impact what you see in the annual report, which will be at SAS 41 with the financial instruments. So we will need to change our disclosure notes in relation to financial instruments, which will differ from prior years, but the measurement base is unlikely to. So I'm just open the floor to any questions on the paper.
Yep, Tim. The Port Otago, obviously, timetable has to fit in with ours.
Sure, yes.
Because that's a huge component of who we are. And so that's all underway as well, is it?
Yes. So I obviously contact Port Otago for their timetable, which has been agreed with their auditors, EY. Deloitte has also obviously agreed with EY and been able to review those group numbers so that we can meet these sign-off dates. Yes.
All right. Happy. I think the main thing is around the auditors' times is over the last couple of years. That's what's been delaying people. But everything else made sense in that.
And they've only recently changed EY. They changed last year, didn't they? That's their second year. Prior to that, Audit New Zealand had some pretty significant workload pressures, and it meant that they struggled to get their audit signed off. Usually we'd be trying to get our annual report signed in before 30 September, but we don't have the timing of the council meetings mean that if we come to Audit and Risk, there's no time for it to go into September here. So we'll roll it through to October.
Great. Right. Thank you very much. Have you done that, Paul? You can see it, Kate.
No, I am.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, page 46 of the pack, corporate policy overview report. So corporate policies, this is currently a item in our plan, but we are going to consider changing the timing of it. Nick, I'll ask you to give a brief overview and then we have that discussion.
Yeah, so this paper comes quarterly, and from the last time we did it, we've only had one meeting of our internal policy group, and we discussed there, and I'll mention in here that the CE and me and one of the other GMs and legal counsel were going to get together just to look at how we were structuring this going forward internally. And then as a result, we were keen to, rather than putting this paper into here every quarter, to switch it to an annual report on the activity that's been going on, unless there was any significant policy changes that we could still just bring on an ad hoc basis. Because as you probably see, it's a fairly administrative paper, so we sort of felt that that would be the better way to go. But we were also having this meeting so that Richard, as new as CE, could just have a good review of how he sees this group working and how we handle the internal policies, as a staff group as well.
Yeah, I must admit, when we signed off our plan for this committee at the last meeting, proposing this as an annual item instead of every meeting was actually something we were supposed to talk about, but I forgot. So that's what's been raised here. So I guess, do we have any questions on the actual policy document itself before we talk about the timeline? Is there half a hand, Kevin?
And this is, I'm really comfortable with where it is sitting and where it's going to go, and I'm referring to paragraph 7, where it will be responsible to sit under legal counsel. I'm just wondering where, in view of all the talks we've had today on health and safety and being a good employer requirements, where do we get as governance the opportunity to check, and I know it will be correct, but to check the correctness and strength of those policies against our requirements as a governor? So where will that sit? When will we get that opportunity to sit? Let's check those policies here.
So the question is around specifically the health and safety policy and whether our committee gets to see it. Is that your question?
Yeah. And I don't want to sit and rewrite the policies, but that's really is pretty integral to me of being a good governor to ensure that those are sitting comfortable.
And so the thing I think of is there'll be however many policies there are within the organisation, a lot, and then which ones do come up to the governance level and which ones don't.
Yep.
Of which I know we've had this discussion before, so there is a bit of a threshold. I'll get maybe Nick to talk about the threshold.
Yeah, so when you look at that, the overall table, which is 3 pages,
yes,
as Andrew says, the first 2 pages are all the internal ones.
Yep.
And they're actually signed by the CE under delegation. So they sit as, internal organisational. The last page are the ones that council, they all come to council for approval. So the health, safety and wellbeing one sits on that first page. Now that's not to say, although we review it and we go through it internally, that's not to say that any of those ones that are important to you, you couldn't say, well, you'd like it just to be presented to this so that you can have a discussion on it.
Yeah.
And just, get your own level of comfort. But at this point, that one, along with all those others on the first 2 pages, sit with the CE as the one signing those off.
That's it. And on page 51, there's a list of those that go to the governance committees.
So, for instance, let's go lone worker, one that's in here somewhere. I think it might be, lone worker in our office. So if I'm at all of these with after the current levels of reporting of violence and abuse now, and I particularly want to know that those people are protected in a good way, that would be just a matter of asking that question, then getting the opportunity to look at that policy.
Yeah, I think
I'm not doubting it.
No,
I'm not
I
doubting
know what
your
you're
policy.
asking, and I know it's not a criticism of any particular policy or area. And after the discussion today, it's a fair question. So I think that getting into the habit through this committee of doing a specific dive into one of our critical risks, which would, like we've just done for climate change, would actually provide much greater information than a table that gives you a level of comfort around everything that's going on, including the policies that stand behind some of the statements that are made. So if we chose violence aggression as a critical risk that the Audit and Risk Committee wants to have a closer look at in one of our future meetings, then for me that would include us coming in and setting out this is all of the things that we have in place to manage that. So that's how I think for me that the assurance will be provided to this group.
Yeah, exactly. Because you think we, as a committee, we do have mechanisms to look at specific areas. But I think we, we're sort of a structure to do that, and whether it's we've now got the deep dives into certain risks. We can ask for something to be presented as that. We're going to like to have some internal audit programs, and we get something onto that as well. So we've got some certain structured mechanisms to.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, so if you back to the people and safety reporting, the critical risk profiles that we included this time, so page 37 is the lone, remote and isolated work critical risk. And so we talk about how we're managing that risk.
I understand that. It's really good.
So I think deep diving into that.
It's good. Thanks very much. Thank you.
And Gretchen.
Sorry, it might be that everyone else understands from having been here last training, but how it manages to become red in the table. Is it based purely on the date there, or can the date be altered? I'm a little bit unsure how the table's actually working. What would trip it into red? Can you alter the date to say, okay, the policy is going to be reviewed on a new date and therefore it's red, or how does that actually work, and why are some yellow and some orange? And
it's our own and probably my own sort of colour coding, so I know what's going on. The orange ones are the ones that are in creation. Yellow ones are ones that people are actively in the process of reviewing those, and they know that they're there. And the red ones, usually they'll have something comment in the status that to be reviewed, which means those are the ones that usually have passed their last review date, and we should get on to those. But so as with any sort of colour coding, the orange ones just sort of it's really just a heads up that somebody's looking at creating one in that space, whether it's not overly critical. But the red ones are the ones that we want to make sure that we get on to actively reviewing and managing those. But the other thing is the green ones are all the ones where everything has been done and they should be relatively up to date. there might be one or two now since the last time we did this that now crept over to where they are due for a review now, but we'll keep working on those as we go. As I said, it's the table itself is very administrative for this sort of level. So, seeing it, as we're working, seeing it every quarter is sort of.
Yeah. So certainly, so my view is the organisation going through this process is absolutely critical. A lot of policies, which then staff act upon. And the process that we've got in place is the right one. And yes, so this committee needs to see that process is actually happening. We can sort of have a chance to ask questions. Doing that annually seems fine to me. If everyone else is in agreement. Yep, great.
Yeah, happy to move 1 and 2.
Kevin and Kate, in favour?
Aye.
Right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Nick.
I'm giving it a quick sweet notes.
All right, moving to page 52 of the pack. Internal audit options. Do you want to?
Yeah, look,
I'll
just make very brief and then hand over. So I've been working on this with Andrew following the last audit risk committee where internal audit was included on the work plan, but so really we need to initiate it because we haven't to this point. So just done some work speaking to other regional councils that have an internal audit function just to learn a little bit about the framework they operate under, and then bringing this paper to enable the table just to have a discussion around where we kick things off in this space. I just think going back to Janet's paper previously, all of the different pieces of that assurance puzzle, this internal audit piece is an important one and we should be doing it. So it'd be good to get it underway.
So I'll just add to that. So our terms of reference is a bullet point in there that we have oversight of any internal audit function. And currently today we haven't had one. And we've talked about for a little while of getting one up and running. Internal audits usually run sort of risk-based. So we look at, you can ask it to look at things based on risk profile. Yes, so that's sort of, and I guess out of this discussion, I'm really keen to make sure that we understand what internal audit is and how we can use it, because it is an amazing tool that's used the right way. So I want to sort of make sure we're all well aware, so let's have a good discussion on it, and then we can go and use it after today. So, Kate.
Slightly tangential question, but Richard's just started. We've got an LTP year. We've got a fairly big piece of work on review of rates happening, which could be aligned with us to a certain extent. But I'm really wondering, I like this idea. I think it's absolutely right to do, but is it the right timing given all of those other heavy lifting that has to happen? Or how can we assimilate it into those processes to add value? Because I'm really, I take all those things into account. I am concerned about adding this right at the moment when we're doing those reviews, because those reviews have been long, slow burner and may give an equally good response. So, I'm just asking some consideration of that.
I have lots. Do you want to go first? Yep. Okay. So, so I guess a couple of things. So you can use this to assist the organisation to sort of improve in any particular areas. So it can be used as a bit of a compliance tool in terms of are our staff comply with the policies. So and it can be time consuming for certain areas if you want it to be. We can just sort of ring fence and say we're just going to look at this area of this team, and you should absolutely keep that into consideration in terms of team workload. We say actually let's stay away from this particular area, this team at the moment, because they're overwhelmed or they've got a high workload. So we can absolutely take that into account, and we should. So you can sort of just say we're going to look at certain areas which we think might be fine. So, fine. Is your
similar, and I appreciate Kate the concern around workload, and we would just have to be careful if we were to commence it this year. Just think very carefully about which area of business we might want to look at, and not duplicate anything that might come out of one of the other external reviews that we've we're undertaking for LTP other things, but I think there is still some value, having talked to some other regional councils and looking at their programs. There are areas that we could do that won't be a duplication that would give us some assurance in some of those areas.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's great.
And just an example, sometimes we might sort of ask a team or area of organisation to, can you look at improving your practices over time? This here can actually be a way of helping them do that in terms of helping them get a bit of a work plan in place to improve. So,
from my point of view, this internal audit is valuable, particularly to identify, to look at our internal controls, but firstly to identify situations where there could be fraud. And what comes to mind when I think of that is the cars at the DCC, the sort of Southern District Health Board fraud with the IT guy. The value in an internal audit is to pick up those things before they actually happen and are discovered and become a huge news item. So there is a lot of value in this, and that is, as a committee here, we have to have assurance that our internal controls are good enough to ensure that there's no such thing as that. There's no level of fraud taking place like that.
Because we actually have to sign off a representation for the auditor around fraud. That we believe we've got appropriate controls in place.
And the annual audit from the auditors, even though they look at that, they have mentioned fraud, they're not actually deliberately seeking out to see if it exists. I mean, and when you have an internal audit where you are focusing on fraud, you start looking at things like addresses, employees' addresses, purchases of land, all sorts of things like that. So it goes into a different level of audit.
I 100% agree with Tim, but I think it even goes further than that, because I think an internal audit will start looking at how each department that is actually operating, and are we achieving the work plan that we've set out. And I think that's not one thing that we see clearly. We set a work plan at a budget time, and is that work plan being adhered to, and what impact that does not adhere. So I think that would do as well. And are we adhering to all our policies? And I think we did a review of compliance about 3 years ago. Consents and the great work that sort of review did and set them alight. And we look how well that team go. It was probably doing all right anyway, but it's doing exceptionally well now. And so that's I think that continual improvement cycle will be part of this process. Not so what you're thinking of, but also a continual improvement process of the whole organisation.
I think the few slides that Andrew put together, the one on page 56 of the agenda sort of demonstrates where you can go with this function, and see the blue area down the bottom in terms of the common starting point is more around just that, the fundamental assurance, probably what Tim was referring to versus what you're talking about, Kevin. As we get more mature, you start moving further up and are actually looking at audits to direct us to work smarter or have a look at our process.
Exciting.
Any other questions on it?
Someone say audit was exciting.
So if we move these recommendations, I'm happy to move. I'm just wondering about the timing, because there isn't that scaffolding around it really.
So just the recommendations. So it notes that the co-chairs will work with the chief executive to commence an internal audit program. And that the findings will be reported back.
Will you give us the audit program at some stage, the internal audit program as well?
Yeah, so the internal audit program is the key bit, and setting that up takes some thought. And so that won't be a quick thing.
No, it won't be a quick thing. So and again, which pushes me back to say, is 23, 24 ambitious? Because we meet 4 times a year. But I think we need the time frame at some stage.
I would want to have the program coming back.
And so we're noting that, and will be reported back. And
yes, the internal audit programs will be reported back.
Yeah, it's a timetable that I think is important that we see that as well.
I think that we've just, Richard, there's a benefit to you as the CE to do this. It's not just for this committee.
Oh no, absolutely.
So, I saw your response then. It is something that you want to know that you've got things under control.
No, absolutely. It's just it wasn't covered off. It could be a long time before you report back on an internal audit.
So if you slightly change that resolution,
The second part, I think, will have to mean that the internal audit program will come back to us to note as well.
So just adding some words
Yep,
to the resolution, that it's also the internal work program that will come back to this committee.
happy to second that.
So that's. Hey, and Kevin, in favour?
Aye.
Right. Thank you. Okay. So that brings us to the end of public. We're going to now move into public excluded. Can I get Kate?
For the reasons.
Yes, Tim, and the reasons to be read, please. Why do I read them?
It's a long time if you're going to read them all.
Yeah.
I think for the reasons in the agenda is what I was.
Reasons in the agenda, I'll just say that.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got Kate and Tim who have moved for us.
What were those?
Yeah.
You do have legal advice if you want to get best practice, though.